Good afternoon, colleagues. I think it's indicative of a stimulating 2 days if sort of right at the end of a 2-day conference and on a Friday to boot. I think the auditorium is pretty well populated. So I think a very big thank you to all the colleagues at RIS. I know this is a huge undertaking. It's very time consuming. There have been RIS colleagues running around the whole day for 2 days, including the Director General. And so really credit to you, Sachin, and your team for putting together Delhi 2 and onwards to Delhi 3. I think just some overall observations. Sorry? Okay, excellent. Just some overall remarks from my side. I think what has been extremely useful and has really built solidly on the discussions we had in 2013 is the fact that we've had such a cross-section of participation, both in terms of countries, but also in terms of sectors and stakeholders. And I think just even this last session itself highlights that point and how we can all learn and share ideas coming from different sectors and different perspectives. And I think that only enriches discussion around South-South cooperation. And I think the point has been made, particularly over the last day, that we are in fact, and we have in fact moved beyond government to government when we're discussing South-South and bringing in other actors, most notably, of course, civil society, but also private sector, and that really reflects largely also what is happening at the global level into these discussions. It is true to say that, and perhaps that way I segue into some remarks about the session that I participated in, but the title of which I cannot remember now, South-South Cooperation, International Architecture and the Role of ECOSOC and DCF. I think it is true to say that while South-South cooperation has been around for a long time and has a philosophy and a tradition behind it, it has really been in the last decade or so, 20 years even, where it has begun to grow exponentially and particularly probably in the last 10 to 15 years. And I think that is also what has engendered both a heightened interest as well as a desire to sort of try to systematize or try to institutionalize or try to capture and really do some analytical work, much more substantive analytical work across the whole gamut than perhaps might have been the case, say, 30 years ago. And it is, of course, in that context that the initiative around the network of southern think tanks developed. Sorry. I just need to recap some of the points that were raised in the panel this morning on institutional architecture. And I've got several sections of notes which I have to find. And I think that was where we kicked off the discussions this morning, was really to highlight that this trajectory of South-South cooperation had also seen the emergence and the establishment in about 2005 of the Development Cooperation Forum. It really reflected the fact that you wanted to have a space, one wanted a space at a UN level to discuss issues of development cooperation, bringing all people together. And that's the one important point that needs to be made about the DCF. While I think the debate reflected some of the shortcomings and some of the weaknesses around, some of the challenges, because I would see those really as challenges for us going forward. The one point that must be made quite forcefully is that it is a representative and legitimate forum under the auspices of the UN, and we can't forget that, and we can't deny that. But at the same time, what we have also seen over a number of years is a growing fragmentation of institutional frameworks within the UN. And what might that potentially mean for the way in which South-South cooperation comes together in terms of policy? We're not talking about sort of micro level projects, but really at the grand global scale, as these things become much more important and their role grows. I think one of the important points that was highlighted, in fact, by a Chinese colleague, was that to some extent one of the challenges that the DCF faces is that in some ways it often reflects a Western narrative, that there still needs to be that shift from a more traditional thinking around aid to a more broad-based development. So the question around who sets the agenda, that while bodies, we know that very well, while bodies in multilateral fora like the UN might very well be representative and be seen to be legitimate, they don't always, the agenda might not always reflect that, and that's partly also because of power relations. The other point that I suppose is something that one has to factor in when one critiques organizations is that while we had the establishment of the DCF in 2005, we've had a broadening of the ECOSOC agenda as we've rolled out the financing for development, a lot of the COP21 issues, as well as Agenda 2030. The UN itself, those institutions are in transition, they are reforming. And I suppose those transformations are messy undertakings. And so it's not likely to be a smooth ride, and there are probably going to be a few steps back and a few steps forward. But what is very important to bear in mind, and I think this point was made quite forcefully, that while the system may have challenges because of this transformation, while there are clearly limitations when you have this very, very broad body, it's very important that we as members of the South also display leadership. That at the end of the day, these are as strong, of course, as their members are willing to commit. So the issue of political will, I think, was very important. All right, perhaps a couple of other points that came up, and I thank the people who drew up these notes for me. I think there were 5 areas or 5 gaps that speakers identified. Clearly the first, in terms of where the DCF could play a role. First was that South-South cooperation means different things to different people, to different people. For some it is trade and commercial investment. For others it is much more specific, focused on development, or based on non-profit activities. Now, so these different perspectives are things that we have to come to grips with, and it's not necessarily about complete harmonization or sort of having one particular narrative, but certainly that sometimes is a challenge. The second point was that often clearly cooperation is bilateral, but we do probably need project initiatives that are shared, that have a shared framework. Thirdly, that as South-South cooperation rises exponentially, the use and more effective use of multilateral institutions, particularly within the UN, I think is extremely important. The fourth point was that while there is a North-South narrative, the narrative on South-South is often available in pieces, so it's a little bit more fragmented than the North-South, and that's obviously something that needs to be addressed as well. And that sectoral cooperation is on the increase within the South, and therefore it's important to explore sectoral frameworks. What else? Perhaps it is useful in this context to also highlight that the role that was identified for an institution, for a network such as NEST, working with the DCF and with other bodies in that regard, also in plugging some of the knowledge and analytical gaps. Perhaps I'll leave it there, and if I remember other things.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks a lot. I think it was quite useful in terms of highlighting what you discussed at the ECOSOC reforms and how you think DCF can play a more important role in terms of engaging with South-South cooperation. And having identified sectoral priority as an area of engagement for South-South cooperation, so I have now great pleasure in inviting Wen Peng to tell us what all happened in the 9 parallel sessions that we had. So it's a huge task before you, and I can understand that you will be bringing out key messages rather than sectoral specificities. So please feel free. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sachin. It's a great pleasure for me to report those rich discussions has been done in 3 panel sessions on those sectoral cooperation. Unfortunately, I haven't been each of them because I've been engaged with other sessions, but thanks for the notes prepared by our excellent IIS staff, right? IIS staff. So I highlight several key points. I think it's quite key. So in the panel session focused on the health discussion, I think there is several points has been brought upon. One is saying this brings the example. They put forward a lot of examples to elaborate the importance of health cooperation, especially focus on the role that Cuba has played during the past decades. Even though the country is not as big as like India or China, but in this sector, that is the health cooperation, they have accumulated abundant knowledge and experience for sharing their expertise and also offering the help hand to the other South countries, particularly in the recent, like the Ebola period. So Cuba has sent a lot of doctors and help to the those Ebola-stricken African countries. So also the discussant panelists from the Mexico has shared their experience how to strengthen those SSC cooperation in the health sector among those Latin American countries, especially Mexico's experience on the cooperation with Central America, focusing on reproductive health. Like 4 modalities has been mentioned, including South-South cooperation, bilateral cooperation, triangular cooperation, and regional cooperation. For example, another case has been highlighted. That is, I think it's an agreement. Let me see. Many pages. Not as many as Elizabeth. Actually, well. Sorry for that pause. There is a contribution made by India here in this panel, has been drawn upon. Yeah, that's a panelist from Nepal. They mentioned the Nepal's very successful partnership with the government of India in eliminating avoidable blindness from Nepal. So this is very impressive. Why read these notes? Because the problem of Nepal that there was only one eye care center in the year 1978. But with the cooperation with India, the cooperation has reduced the blindness from 0.8% in the year 1981 now to 0.35% in the year 2012. So India has assisted in terms of ambulance, construction of hospital building, and the full equipped eye care buses. So government of India supports as many as, I think it's 15,000 cataract operations annually. So this helps to clear the backlog in in the cataract blindness. So given strong social cultural links with the subcontinent, these hospitals also cater to patients not only in the Nepal and also from Bangladesh, India, and Bhutan, and Tibet. So this is a very impressive case. And also other panelists from India, like from ORF, New Delhi, also shared their study on India's private sector investment in health sector in Africa. So those are the main points from this health sector. And then I think another panel focuses on ASP, agricultural and natural resources. So some points has been raised. For example, in S&P, technology does not only concern research, but also the innovations at community level. And also another point to mention is bilateral cooperation in S&T between India and different developing countries, and the collaborations between BRICS, IBSA, and the developing countries provide interesting examples to study the SSC in the changing international system of innovations. So people also, the panelists also raised this new idea, new institutions like IBSA, IPSA, and BRICS, along with the SS, is not only restricted to soft balancing, but also in promoting innovations through S&P. So the priority areas chosen are not only should be socially relevant, but also have the knowledge intensity thrust. And in the area of agriculture, and I think all the panelists has all agreed, it is quite important to bring a balance between agricultural development and the natural resources. So let's focus on this balance issue, environmental protection and the resources development and agricultural development. And another point is cooperation in agriculture should include reduction of poverty, elimination of hunger, and more nutrition, increasing income to farmers, and food security and food safety issues. And another point is SSC should develop a vision for rural development with enabling policy support in specific areas such as access to credit and insurance, technical support, market access, and standardization, strengthening local research institutions, strengthening local research group for strategic sector, creating national R&D system, and entrepreneurship innovation. Another page. Yes, I think something relates to Africa's also mentioned, panelists mentioned Africa faces challenges in biotechnical technology and biosafety due to lack of funds, lack of technical expertise, quality of seeds and inputs, such as fertilizer, agrochemicals, etc. So inadequate RPI infrastructure and inadequate participation by the governments in promoting technical know-how. So areas for collaboration in SSC and the seed sector, small farm machinery, water irrigation are very priority, need to be paid great attention. So finally, another panel session is focused on education and capacity building. So this session highlights the importance of the role the education and the capacity building could play for strengthening South-South cooperation. So this is emerging, they focused on emerging modalities for engagement. And also, like Chairman has talked about the historical phases of SSC. And again, the CUPA has been given high remarks and for this education cooperation among SSC countries. So CUPA is the longest partner in SSC. Again, I think CUPA, people think CUPA has been much more successful in SSC than any other country. So probably next time when the conference is on, the participants from CUPA should be invited, right? Yeah, we should go to that. That's a great idea. Even Obama.com paid visit to that part of land. And also, some proportions are education is very crucial for development. It is an ingredient of development. And the more educated people, which means more developed the economy is. Here, and Mrs. Karen Costa Vazquez from Brazil highlighted the position of Africa and objective, saying an objective was the need to systemize SSC practice. So she discussed the two examples here, Brazil-Africa cooperation and India-Africa cooperation. I got my own experience when I visited Africa to see this long-distance education system has been done between India and African countries. So conclusion is capacity development is at the heart of Brazilian and Indian cooperation in Africa. And the second is Brazilian SSC from beginning recognized this and sought to answer with structuring capacities. And number three is SSC practices should be expanded to other countries. So here, another panelist from Mexico mentioned another very impressive cooperation example. That is called the Pacific Islands, which was founded in the year 2011 between Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. This cooperation represents the most advanced exercise of domestic integration and SSC in Latin America. Its purpose was to create an area of deep integration through political, economic, and social linkage, where educational sector is the most important. So above mentioned countries, those Latin American countries, signed the presidential declaration of Pacific Islands, and it has gained the presence in political and economic scenario in Latin America. So this one, I think, shows as a very good highlighting example for other cooperation model to follow. So in short, the final remarks in this session is SSC put into practice between 4 countries above mentioned, which is still in its initial stages, and this is the most successful endeavor. So I think I stop here for this report.
Thank you, Winping. This was really marvelous. As you may have gathered, she reported from 6 parallel sessions on health, education, science, technology, agriculture, natural resources, trade, and investment. And as you might have noticed in the agenda, the task for the parallel sessions was in the sectors to address 3 major questions. 1, the modality of engagement by the southern actors. 2nd, emerging modalities and engagement, so new areas that are being added. 3rd was whether local production is being encouraged by South-South cooperation. So it's not just trading and dumping of our products, but how local capacity is being encouraged. And last was in terms of whether South-South cooperation is entering in the high-end research. Is it just replicating, or is it entering in the high-end? And I understand in the health sector, this was discussion. So maybe I think next time when we do the agriculture one, we can focus on how high-end partnership within South-South cooperation is feasible as far as agriculture is concerned. Now I have great pleasure in inviting Andre to report from his session.
Thank you, Sachin. Let me just join Elizabeth in commending you for, and IRS, for the organization of this conference. I arrived earlier this week and I had a sample of how much work it was to put this together. It's a small one because I know the work has begun long before that. Anyway, the 2 sessions I was covering dealt with, respectively, the theoretical framework for South-South cooperation and evaluation methodologies and accounting. So I will begin with the parallel session 2, which is precisely about the theoretical framework for South-South cooperation. The two first presenters, Professor Mohanty and Professor Roy, they dealt more with macroeconomic theories of growth and development, particularly monetarist theories, structural theories, which were presented in opposition, and also how inflation can affect growth. I will focus more on other points which were made in the panel regarding particularly the theories for South-South cooperation. And there were a wide range of theories from different fields in the social sciences, in addition to economics, which was already mentioned, that were raised to address the issue of South-South cooperation. For instance, Dr. Sai Silva from Brazil made reference to IR theories, realism, liberalism, constructivism, as well as comparative politics theories, which focus primarily on policy transfer, and that would be perhaps, in her view, the main theoretical approach for South-South cooperation on the field of public policy as well. It was stressed throughout the panel, particularly by Dr. Strange, that developing countries must have their own process of creating knowledge. They should not, in other words, rely on knowledge that's created by the northern countries, by the high-income countries. That the principles of South-South cooperation are emerging. He also stressed that at a time of great change, of great transition. And for this reason, South-South cooperation has not been fully theorized yet, but it comes as a game changer. It was also emphasized by other presenters that South-South cooperation did not depend on a theory in order to emerge. It actually, and this was a point made by Professor Radharamanan, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but South-South cooperation emerged in a pre-theoretical model, so to speak, and the challenge for theorization of South-South cooperation is precisely to take into account all its variants and its great diversity, which also should, by the way, consider political issues and how to evaluate South-South cooperation. Dr. Chao Lia set forth the different pillars of South-South cooperation, which might be useful for the purposes of theorization. And then there was a very lively debate. The FAO representative questioned whether, in fact, we needed a theory for South-South cooperation. Perhaps we don't need one. After all, we're already practicing South-South cooperation. And he said we already have a theory of change. Perhaps that might be the theoretical approach for South-South cooperation. To which Professor Chaturvedi here disagreed and stressed the fact that we do need to have knowledge generated by the South, particularly with respect to South-South cooperation. We cannot rely on Western academia for the purposes of theorizing this cooperation, and that if we don't do it, they will do it, meaning Western academia and the countries of the North. And that's why it's so important for us to try to come up with a theory, even, again, if it was not a prerequisite for the practice and the emergence of South-South cooperation as such. Okay, so let me move on to the other parallel session, which is the session number 3 on evaluation methodologies in accounting. It was chaired by Dr. Roy, and he started out by stressing the differences between South-South cooperation and official development aid, and in his view, these differences speak mostly to the fact that South-South cooperation is political. It's essentially political in nature. It's not about saving Africa, as he put it in his own words, in contrast to the ODA, which would be about saving Africa, in other words. And at least it's presented as being non-political, even if this is questionable. Then we had Professor Lopez, which is the representative from SEHID. She presented the database that her institutions engaged in building with countries from Latin America. She talked about its categories, and she also moved on to talk about evaluation, which again was the primary topic of this session. She noted the efforts to test principles of South-South cooperation, and she also made reference to a study carried out by Sahib that tried to measure to what extent projects of South-South cooperation in the region were demand-driven. And luckily, optimistically, she found that the vast majority were indeed demand-driven. And she got into also many other details regarding the report of Sahib on data, which is a report limited to technical cooperation and also limited to project-based data, meaning that for the most part it counts the number of projects that are implemented by whom and where. Professor Chakrabarti presented the main principles for evaluating South-South cooperation. He counterposed those to the principles of the DAC and of some authors who have written about this. His own suggestion regarding principles to evaluate South-South cooperation were the following. He stressed that actually these should act as a criteria for that evaluation: relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability, as well as an alternative set, which would be empowerment, trust building, and sustainability. And he also stressed that adopting these criteria could also help in theory building, which was the topic of the previous session. Then there was my presentation, which noted that pressures for evaluating South-South cooperation come not only from the North, from the OECD and the forums that the OECD sponsors, but it also comes from domestic sources. Mainly civil society groups, taxpayers in general are increasingly wanting to have access to more data about South-South cooperation and primarily to know the impact of that cooperation. But there are many challenges to doing so. One would be to distinguish between what in fact is South-South development cooperation and what is for-profit activities, namely trade, foreign direct investment, export of services, and the like. There's also another challenge that's related to the fragmented institutional structure of South-South development cooperation in most southern partners, including Brazil, which was the main focus of my presentation. And this has implications both for the quality of data that we have access to and for centralized mechanisms for M&E, for monitoring and evaluation. I also talked about the ABC approach for its monitoring and evaluation. I will not get into those details here. And some of the challenges that Brazil has faced in its very incipient efforts towards implementing a system of M&E, which is that there's no feedback loop regarding the monitoring that's being executed, meaning it's not really incorporated to the projects while they're being implemented, neither it's incorporated into institutional memory so as to influence the elaboration of future projects. There's also an issue that Brazilian cooperation has been, much of it structuralist in nature, structuring, so better put, which means that it aims at building capacity and autonomy in partner countries. This is a long-term objective. It's not easily evaluated by short-term evaluation systems, and it also has the difficulty of evaluating capacity building and autonomy in and of itself. So we had a presentation also by Dr. Collins from UNDP in Bangkok. She stressed the need to collect data for the purposes of evaluation, meaning South-South cooperation. After the evaluation process, according to her, it would be also very important to learn from this evaluation, which is also a point I also made previously in the Brazilian context, and to reduce the costs for the evaluation of South-South cooperation. If the process is too costly, then it might not be worth it, given the scarcity of resources involved in all of these projects. There was also an issue of South-South cooperation governance that she raised, and the importance of innovating in South-South cooperation. And finally, Professor Sinha of the University of Birmingham also raised a number of general points regarding South-South development cooperation. He also noted that there were two sources for evaluating this cooperation. One is external, the other one is internal. he appreciated the problems raised by the lack of data, and he stressed that that South-South cooperation is not primarily a monetary activity and should not be conceived of as such, but there should be an adequate appreciation of non-monetized aspects of this cooperation to capture it in its entirety. There should be financial consistency, according to the professor. This refers to the need also for training in knowledge and of financial accounting and registries. He noted that there is a problem in distinguishing private and governmental cooperation, and the one that's for profit and the one that aims primarily at development. Public and private money should be distinguished, and also their sources. Their sources can be public, private, or international. He noted the Indian government follows conditionality by the IMF and the World Bank, and the issue of multilateral cooperation, bilateral, should also be distinguished. And that efforts have been made for progress in all these areas. That's, he concludes. And so, and then we had a short debate. There were questions about the fragmentation of South-South cooperation, how it impacts evaluation, about the sovereign debt and how it should be made more transparent, and about the adequacy of the SAHID framework for data gathering and for evaluation for countries in the region. And then there were several examples, but I'll stop here.
Thank you, Andre. Thanks a lot. I think it was quite interesting to have these two sessions on theoretical framework and methodology both together. So, great job. Now, as I had told you in the morning yesterday, we had one very specific and very important, interesting session on one world and global citizenship. Dr. Chandrachud Singh would brief you on this.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi. I'll just take half a second to say a big thank you on part of each one of us who participated. As the member of academia, we travel, we organize conferences, but this one definitely goes to the top few ones, which is spotless, which is blemishless. Well done, well done. Now, the session that I was part of did not focus on economics, did not focus on technology. It was more based on morality, the moral norms of creating a one world citizenship. And there were some very eminent people. Thomas Pogge was the chair of it. He introduced the idea, and he says that, look, if at all we can make the world free of nepotism, that's when we can move towards the right direction. There were discussions. Ajay Mehta from Seva Mandir, Udaipur, his idea was to get these international institutions, support civil society organizations all across, and perhaps that, he thought, would lead to a better coordination and a better movement towards that idea. Narayani Ganesh spoke of the need of sharing of experiences, and she said that perhaps one way that could be done, nepotism could be done away with, was if people could share their own problems. Local issues could then have global resonance, and that is when it could be solved. There was another presentation by James Arput Raj, for whom the idea was that people should be in the center of any debate of the South-South cooperation. The dialogues between people should be encouraged. He also was in favor of UN reforms and thought that perhaps that is one way through which the idea of world citizenship could be realized. Another fantastic presentation was from Professor Syed Munir Khasru, who in fact gave a new acronym in the name of COLD model, which is Connect, Organize, Learn, and Develop. And he thought that this is how people could get connected, and this is how the nations of the South could move forward towards the realization of the idea. And as now, even there, mine was the last presentation, where I tried to look into the idea of cosmopolitanism, the moral variant and the institutional variant, and I critiqued both, saying that perhaps cosmopolitanism is good, but the way to move forward is not through institutions, especially on very pressing issues like climate change. The rooted cosmopolitan model, which looks on, which tries to build on the local and the global connect, or which tries to emphasize the local, which is in sync with that cosmopolitan ideal. Through that, perhaps, there could be some movement forward in realizing those outcomes. So this is what we did, and we had some questions. I'll not go on that. Professor Luis Cabrera from Griffith University was the co-chair, and he brought back Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, their ideas in terms of moral cosmopolitanism and how Nehru was pitching in for institutional cosmopolitanism. So that's where we ended. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chur Singh. Colleagues, the reports that were presented by my panelists here that could not have been possible had students not put in their efforts, and there were 9 institutions and 25 students involved apart from RIS own faculty and ITech participants from RIS. The institutions which participated with us were students from Sharda, Jindal, Jamia, JNU, Amity, LSR, Sri Venkateshwaran College, Indian Institute of Finance, and Observer Research Foundation. So a big hand to these 25 students. And my own colleagues, Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, Dr. Amit Kumar, Dr. Priyadarshi Dash, and Pratyush. They coordinated the reports, so I thank them all. Now I'm informed that Foreign Secretary is on his way, so we would just break for 2 minutes. They would settle the dais, and then we will be back here for the final session. Thank you.